as much fiber as you can put into the ground, it will eventually end up being exhausted. So that's why for us, when we're building these networks, we're building the fattest pipes we can. So that's instead of a 48 and 96 that we might have built a while ago, that's now 288, 432. In the data center space, you're seeing people build cables that are thousands of fibers to meet the needs that they specifically have. So we will have invested $1 billion into our 10-state region to build networks. So if you do that times all the other states and all the other places, you're talking about tens of billions of dollars of fiber construction that still needs to take place just to make the things that Apple and Verizon and T-Mobile are telling you you're going to do with 5G actually happen.
Let's discover the Cleveland entrepreneurial ecosystem. We are telling the stories of its entrepreneurs and those supporting them. Welcome to the Lay of the Land podcast, where we are exploring what people are building in Cleveland. I'm your host, Jeffrey Stern, and today we are talking about the technology that enables the streaming of this podcast today, the internet itself, and specifically the world of fiber. Brett Lindsey is the CEO of Everstream, and he is also the founder and chairman of Snip Internet. Snip, which Brett had founded back in 2016, is a Cleveland-based internet service provider and recently has closed on a $7.75 million funding round to support its expansion across the Midwest market. And in parallel, as the chief operations officer of OneCommunity before having joined Everstream, Brett oversaw the $100 million expansion of the network that ultimately became Everstream, which, as CEO, he has since taken from a 2,500 route mile fiber network to more than 15,000 route miles of fiber. In 2016 to 2017, Brett more than tripled the size of the organization with less than 12 months with 2 Michigan-based acquisitions. And in 2018, Brett facilitated the sale of Everstream to AMP Capital, which is a global investment manager, which he used to expand Everstream's network into 5 new markets, including Chicago, Columbus, Indianapolis, Milwaukee, and St. Louis, and closed additional strategic acquisitions across Indianapolis and St. Louis. With this, Brett brings more than 25 years of experience in the telecom industry, having also served as president of Elantic Telecom and COO of Vox Mobile. Today, Brett also serves on the technology board of advisors for Greater Cleveland Partnership. Brett is a true wealth of knowledge, and this was one of the most informative conversations yet. So please listen, learn, and enjoy. I was actually on a run earlier today, and I ran by the Detroit Superior Bridge on West 25th, and I came across the Snip Internet logo there. And so it got me excited for today's conversation with Snip and Everstream, just having this very large presence here in Cleveland. So I've been really looking forward to having you on to share your story. So thank you for coming on, Brett.
My pleasure.
So I'd love to start with your interest in the internet and connectivity and how it was that you first went about breaking into telecom.
Frankly, I didn't know what I was going to do when I was in college, and I had a mentor who kind of came into my life. My aunt remarried, and I met this guy, and he was running a long distance company. So this is in the late 80s when people actually paid for long distance. So he was running a long distance company in California, and I thought, man, this guy's got a great life. What did you do? And he said, well, you need to start selling telephone equipment so that you kind of understand how things piece together. And then from there, if you can move to an operating company so you understand kind of the mechanics of all the pieces that actually run the network. And then hopefully, move from sales into operations. And if you do that right, then maybe you'll get a chance to be an executive at an organization. And so I did exactly what he said. I finished school in 92. I started working for a company called Wiltel that now doesn't exist, selling telephone systems. I was literally 22 years old, got a commission and a small salary to just go sell phone systems, and figured out that if I spent a lot of time with the technicians, the people that actually installed the gear, then I would know what the hell I was talking about when I went to sell the next one. And it proceeded to really, get into that business and do well. In the 96 timeframe, the Telecom Act happened, which basically allowed for competition in the local phone market. So you could come compete against AT&T or Verizon or whomever was the Arbuck there. And that allowed for me to make that jump to the operating company. So I worked at a company called Brooks Fiber, which later became part of WorldCom, and then moved to Ohio in 1996, or 1997 actually, to work for a company called Nextlink that later became XO Communications and now is owned by Verizon. And so that kind of gave me an opportunity to work from sales into operations into like a city manager job. And then I started running construction across the Midwest and then moved into executive positions after that. So I've been at, next year I'll mark 30 years that I've been in the space.
Got it. What are kind of the formative experiences throughout that got you into the mind space of, wanting to start and build your own companies?
Sure. So, I think from 92 until, son was born in 2002. So up until May of 2002, I worked for what I would call big companies, 5,000, 10,000 or more people within the organizations. And in 2002, a day before I believe my son was born, my division within Qwest got shut down. Lost my job with a whole bunch of other people and immediately started having conversations with a small private equity firm out of Boston that I had met through my last position. And they were looking for someone to run sales and marketing for a fiber-based company that was headquartered in Philadelphia, but had a presence in Cleveland. So I moved my family from Columbus to Cleveland. And so that was my first real foray into being at a private equity backed business that was really kind of on the cusp of, building out network and starting to win customers. And it's actually kind of funny. So I joined in 2002. Mm-hmm. In 2003, I actually donated fiber from my network. The company was called City Signal to what then was the original One Cleveland, which later became OneCommunity. So they were trying to kick off and connect all of the institutions around Cleveland. And so we donated them a pair of fibers to kind of help get them started. And then I never heard from them again. I went on and did other things. But it comes full circle back to 2010. We can talk a little bit about how Everstream started, but it's a very small world in the telecom space. And so for me, it was, okay, I don't want to work at a big company anymore. I appreciate what I learned and they were great, but I really wanted to be able to control my own destiny. And starting my own business was more around wanting to be able to take the things that I learned through the process that I thought were great around culture and how you treat people and how you grow your business and get rid of the crap that I didn't like the bullshit of politics and all the other things that happen in a big business that really aren't necessary. People just assume that they have to be that way. And so I think for me, it was an opportunity to go, okay, I feel like I've learned a lot of useful information over this period of time. Can I actually implement it? And can I make a company grow the way that I have a vision for it? And I think I've been fortunate to be able to do that, since 2010 when I joined OneCommunity, which later became Everstream. And then the creation of Snip back in 2015 kind of gave me that flexibility and freedom to try to do the things that I thought were going to be the most impactful on both customers and the people that worked with me.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I definitely want to get into the founding story of Everstream. I'm really interested in it because to me, coming from the startup world as I know it and the founding of companies, I typically have from the stories I've heard and being involved in the space myself involves this kind of iterative process of working towards an MVP. And from afar, how I understand Everstream and look at it, the idea of starting a fiber network and infrastructure company seems like such a different approach, really, in terms of getting to MVP. Because in a lot of ways, how I've thought about product market fit and surmounting that, it just feels a little bit different than how you would approach building a company like Everstream. So I would love to hear the founding story of that and how it is that you actually go about starting a fiber network service provider company.
Yeah, so it is not a traditional startup, obviously, because what you have to have is, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to do it.
Right.
So, I joined what was called OneCommunity in 2010. And so they had received about $100 million of federal grant money from under Obama for the Broadband Stimulus Act that came out, as well as the FCC to build a rural healthcare pilot program to connect hospitals in rural Ohio. So when I got there, we had, 20 or 22 people. We had a handful of technical folks that kind of understood what was going on, but a whole bunch of other people who didn't really understand what we were going to be doing. And so we started quickly ramping. So from 2010 to 2013, it was really just build, just get the network built, try to sell customers along the way. But trying to sell customers on buying internet or connectivity from you when you don't have any fiber in the ground, as you can imagine, is a little bit difficult, kind of more than the chicken and the egg. Like they don't really care. If you don't have fiber in the ground, why are we talking?
Right.
So we did, and we only had 2 salespeople and we grew the business. In 2013, we started running into the issue where people were saying, gosh, if I'm an enterprise company, why would I buy from you, a nonprofit? And it really came to a head. I think it was late 2013, early 2014, had a meeting with Sherwin-Williams. And they were like, look, love the story, love the fact that you got fiber all over Northeast Ohio. But if I go to my superiors and tell them I'm going to buy fiber from a nonprofit, they're going to be like, what the hell are you talking about? They could change their mind on whether they want to be in the business. How are they going to continue to raise capital? Not sure that it makes sense. And so that was really my opportunity to create Everstream. So we created Everstream as a for-profit subsidiary of OneCommunity. And so we started winning enterprise business and fiber to the tower and wholesale and all the things that anyone else in our space would do. But what we did was, as I said, you need tens or hundreds of millions. We were still a nonprofit. We had relationships with all the local banks in town, but we really needed a private equity partner to come in and capitalize the business the way it was needed so that it could grow. And so during that process, finally got the board at OneCommunity to agree to effectively let me take all the fiber assets, put them into Everstream, create a for-profit entity for which I then could go raise capital, and then would create a dividend stream, if you will, kind of for OneCommunity, so they could continue with their philanthropic work for a period of time and not kind of like all of a sudden lose all their revenue. And then when we sold Everstream, they would benefit from that. I'm not sure that they actually really thought it was going to happen, but it did. So this group, MC Partners, which is the same group that I mentioned that I started working for back in 2002, actually came in and invested $50 million in my idea to take the business private. And so that was now the third time that I had worked with this group. I worked with them in 2002. I worked with them again in 2005, and then we'd kind of gone our separate ways. So they were coming back in. So they were a known entity. And I think the benefit of having worked at several places before, I had some credibility, and it was easier for them to understand, the story and willing to commit to give us capital. And so they came in with a plan of giving us $50 million to us. So it was MC Partners, JP Morgan, and Morgan Stanley. Mm-hmm. And the idea was to take a business that was pretty nascent. We're only doing about $1.5 million or $2 million a year of EBITDA, about 12.5, 13 million of revenue, and take it over a 5-year period to 14.5 million of EBITDA and say 45 to 50 million of revenue. And so we started down that path. I think it was the second day after we closed our funding, we got a book on a business in Michigan that was for sale. They were getting ready to go into bankruptcy. And I had some experience in the past where I bought a company, took it through bankruptcy, and brought it out the other side. Mm-hmm. And so we started bidding on this business, ended up being what's referred to as a stalking horse in the bankruptcy process, and then ended up effectively buying a statewide network across the entire state of Michigan for $36 million, which is unheard of. Nobody banks fiber business. You have to be doing something really wrong to not be successful. And the other reason that you're not going to be successful goes back to not having enough capital. So they were capital constrained, and they never met a product they didn't like. They were in every business known to man that was related to telecommunications. So anyway, they got in trouble. We bought that. We then also bought another business in Michigan called Links Network Group. So from the beginning of 15 to January of 2017, we acquired both businesses, expanded from Northeast Ohio across all the way into the state of Michigan, mm-hmm. and some fiber through Wisconsin and down into Chicago. So what we ended up doing between 2015 and 2017 was take the business from $1.5 million to 18.5 million of EBITDA and about 50 million of revenue. So we had achieved our 5-year goals in 3, and the market was getting hotter. And so my question to our private equity partner was, hey, I think we should sell the business now. I need a lot more capital than you're going to be able to give me to continue to grow the business long term. And so I said, what is the right return for you? What is the number that will make you go, yeah, I'll sell the business for that? And so they said it's 300 million. Well, 300 million at that point, that was going to mean a valuation that we were going to get would be like, close to 18 and a half times EBITDA mm-hmm. for that sale, which obviously is a healthy multiple. But we were successful in doing that. So we sold to A&P in 2018 for 333 million. And for us, that was a great return. But I think what it did for me was it solidified the belief that if we ran the business what I believe to be was the right way, and what I say by that is leading the business for the people. Look, people can say all the time that you've got to put the customer first. You have to put your people first. If you don't put your people first, there's no way that the customer is going to have a good experience. So we started building, which I think you've probably heard me talk about, our mantras. What drives the business. Do what you say you will do. In our building, that feels like the golden rule. Like everyone knows that's our motto. It's on our T-shirts. It's tattooed on my arm. I'm not kidding. So for me, it is my personal mantra that I have been kind of maybe inflicted on people, but that's what we do. The second one, happy people, happy customers. If our people aren't happy, there's not a chance in hell that the customers are going to want to do business with us. And then the last one is the no asshole policy. Nobody wants to come to work and work with an asshole who is making your life hard, who makes people feel, harassed or not safe or whatever. I mean, nobody wants that. And so the idea has just been, if we live by these kind of basic mantras, that we will do better than everyone else. And I think it's continued to prove itself out through this period of time.
Yeah, that's an extraordinary story there. You mentioned on a lot of things there, threads I'd love to pull on. I want to start with, in the earlier years, you mentioned, the strategy was really just building out this network. And it sounded like over time, it transitioned maybe more towards an acquisition of other infrastructure and assets that had already been built out. I'd love to get your perspective on just this build versus buy, strategy approach in this business, and how it is that you thought about that with regards to, the geographic expansion, and when it made sense to build and when it made sense to buy, and just, the rationale behind those decisions.
Sure. So, I think, and it's the thing that everybody says, right? Buy low, sell high. How do we find some assets that we can pick up that are at a fair price? And the challenge was they're not always going to be that way. I mean, fortunately, we found a company that was in bankruptcy. We were getting what do we look for? Who are their customers? Where's their fiber network go? And is it a dense network, meaning that they've built it themselves, they put fat cables in the ground or up on telephone poles? Or is it what we call a thin network, where you have bought fiber from other providers and kind of pieced it all together, but you don't really have enough fiber for the long term? You have it for the short term, but if you're going to be in business for the next 10 years, there's not enough fiber there. And so what we were looking for were companies that had fiber-rich assets that were going to be meaningful, that would create long-term value. And so we have done, we're getting ready to close I believe it's our 6th or 7th acquisition next week. And so for us, every acquisition is a little bit different. And so, when we did the Michigan ones, it was really just about, can we get a little bit more geography, a little bit more kind of land grab, where we can be more relevant to customers. And so, there's some nice synergies between Ohio and Michigan. How can we leverage that? Mm-hmm. So from there, when we sold to AMP, we started looking at acquisitions that were frankly too expensive. So, we looked at an acquisition in Southern Illinois that was kind of rural, nice network, but no big markets, not a lot of upside, and it was expensive. And it ended up going to a cable company called Cable One for north of $300 million for a business that I would not, if it was my money, I would not have spent $300 million to buy. And then we looked at another business called Bluebird, and it was more of the kind of thin fiber count, again, not in a bunch of great markets. And I just thought, again, it's my money, I'm not doing it. So in February of 2019, we had a board meeting with AMP. We completely went in with the new strategy. And I said, look, these deals don't make sense. They're too expensive. We will find deals that do make sense, but these aren't the ones. And instead, give me $300 million so that I can go build fiber in new markets to increase my geography and give me more scale so that I can go win bigger contracts. And it was an easy story to sell, because that same day we had gotten our first order from T-Mobile, where they were buying 1,100 towers, basically us building fiber to their cell towers. And they were across a number of these markets that we wanted to build into. So they agreed to fund a $300 million capital campaign to go into Columbus, Ohio, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Chicago, Indianapolis, and St. Louis. And so we just full speed ahead going and building fiber in those markets. And all the while, the sales organization is focusing on trying to find who's that next big customer that we can expand with. So it was a little bit of build it and they will come. But we have had a good success of building both an enterprise sales engine, wholesale, and wireless. So AMP kind of believed in the story of what we were doing. But from there, once we identified these were the markets that we were going to build in, I started looking for small kind of tuck-in, bolt-in type acquisitions in each market that we could do that would help speed up our process. So, we bought a company called Arch in St. Louis, which was a downtown conduit system that really just gave us, a couple steps forward than where we were when we started to build in St. Louis. And then we looked at a data center company in Indianapolis that didn't make sense for us to buy, but a data center company did. And then they didn't want their fiber assets and customers. And so we bought that. And while I didn't get a bunch of fiber assets, I got a bunch of good customer relationships that I knew I could then layer on top of the fiber that we were building. And each one of these acquisitions has kind of gotten progressively more expensive. Mm-hmm. And then we did Rocket Fiber in Detroit, which was, we knew that we needed a presence in Detroit that was meaningful. that's a business that had been funded by Dan Gilbert, and there was a team of people there. And obviously there's a lot of synergies between Cleveland and Detroit. Anyway, so that was up until last year had been our most expensive acquisition. So we closed that, and actually during COVID, which is a monstrous pain in the ass.
I can imagine.
And then we are closing on Unity next week, which will take us into Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey. So from 2018 to now, we have gone from 2 states to 10. And so a lot of that has been done through acquisition, but also because we've built just a shit ton of fiber everywhere. So last year we built over 2,000 miles of fiber. This year we're going to build about the same. And so there's just an incredible amount of capital that goes into making that happen.
Yeah. So I want to ask a really basic question here. Assuming you have that capital, that financial sponsor, I have this idea in my head of what it is to actually build fiber, but I'm sure I am terribly wrong about like what that actually is. So how do you actually build fiber? What is that process for building out this infrastructure?
Yeah, so there's really 2 ways. You're either going to do it aerial or underground. So aerial means literally every telephone pole that you see up, running up and down the street with all kinds of cables on it. We are on tens of thousands of poles where we actually, you're hanging what's called strands. So you're putting up this piece of metal strand up to support the weight of the cable, and you're literally hooking it to the pole with a bucket truck and a reel and unwinding fiber along those poles. And so that's how you'll build a stretch. And then all of a sudden there'll be no poles and you'll need to go underground. And so you'll either literally get out there with a boring machine in the public right of way, get your permits, and bore underground a conduit and then pull fiber through that conduit. And other times you'll lease available conduits from partners or parties like an AT&T or the gas company or whoever it is that may have available conduits. But we own and operate 25,000 miles and like route miles, driving miles of fiber across the 10 states now. So it's, you can imagine everything from building it is one thing. Then you've got to operate it. You've got to hope that you don't have a windstorm or an ice storm or somebody drives a delivery truck into a pole and knocks it down and catches on fire. All the stuff that you would imagine that could happen does happen, on a daily basis.
Got it. When you look at the fiber industry overall, like how much fiber do we have laid out relative to, traditional connectivity infrastructure? How much room is there to build? And, why is gigabit fiber internet vital versus this traditional internet infrastructure?
So the first question, there is not enough fiber in the ground to support everything that we're going to need, even for the next decade. Well, let's think about kind of the evolution of why it's fiber. So you have AT&T, who had a copper infrastructure for years and years and years. You had the cable companies that had a coax infrastructure that they were using for traditional video services. Mm-hmm. And so these guys had kind of separate businesses. They're the phone company and this guy's the cable guy. What everybody started to converge on is the fact that you have limitations just from a physics perspective on how much data you can push across those mediums, copper and coax, and the distance limitations around it as well. And so fiber started coming into vogue, a long time ago, but people talk about it a lot now. But so what ends up happening is AT&T starts to build fiber, Spectrum, the old Time Warner, they start to build fiber. And then you had new parties coming in. So like in 1996, when the Telecom Act happened, everybody thought they were going to be the next big AT&T phone company. And so everybody had to build fiber networks and connect all these locations together. And then that kind of washed out. Everybody realized, wait a minute, we don't need that many telephone companies. What we really need is the opportunity to build fiber and provide high-speed connectivity between buildings. And so that's really where fiber comes into play. The challenge is that fiber still is a finite resource. If you put in the old days, you might only build a 48 strand or a 96 strand, so individual pieces of glass so you have a big cable with what's called a buffer tube inside that has 12 individual strands of fiber. And so you splice a buffer tube together and you add a few customers along the way. But depending on how you manage that network, you can eat up that fiber actually fairly quickly. Now, technology has moved along the way that you can make those fiber networks extend and you can put more across them. But at the end of the day, all of the things so the macroeconomic trends in our industry are these: organic internet usage. So how much internet you're using at home or the businesses are using is growing at almost triple digits every year. It's just continuing to go up. Wireless is the same way. And I know one of the questions is about 5G, but the push to make 5G a reality requires fiber. You have to have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of small cells across the entire US to make 5G a reality. And every one of those 5G nodes is required, it has to have fiber to be able to work. Then you've got people moving things to the cloud, whether that's AWS, Azure, Google. All of that requires additional connectivity, direct connections that are required across fiber for the speed that people want. And then you've got just traditional data centers, regional data centers, and then folks that are going into what are hyperscale big data centers like a Facebook owns for content for Instagram and all that kind of stuff. But every one of those things requires fiber. So it's almost like as much fiber as you can put into the ground, it will eventually end up being exhausted. So that's why for us, when we're building these networks, we're building the fattest pipes we can. So that's instead of a 48 and 96 that we might have built a while ago, that's now 288, 432. In the data center space, you're seeing people build cables that are thousands of fibers to meet the needs that they specifically have. So it's the good and the bad. We have spent, if you include what was spent to acquire us back in 2018, we will have invested $1 billion into our 10-state region to build networks. So if you do that times all the other states and all the other places, you're talking about tens of billions of dollars of fiber construction that still needs to take place just to make the things that Apple and Verizon and T-Mobile are telling you you're going to do with 5G actually happen.
Got it. When you think about, the building of all of this fiber, I'd love if you could just paint a picture maybe of the competition in the space. Because when I think about the internet, I think about Comcast, I think about Spectrum, I think about AT&T. Why is it that here in Cleveland, the innovation, is coming from Everstream and not from one of these, oligopolistic companies that has infinite capital and can invest tens of billions of dollars to build this stuff out without a financial sponsor?
Yeah, so I think, so there's two things. The biggest competitors are AT&T and whoever the MSO, whoever the cable guy is, because they've got the market share. AT&T's been here for more than 100 years, and the cable guys, on average, have been here for 25 to 30 years, typically. So as far as the competitive landscape, as far as I'm concerned, they're all that matter. There are other providers out there, a Lumen, a Windstream, a Zayo, whomever, but they don't have the market share that I'm going after. I'm going after local customers in a metro market, and that business today is owned by AT&T and Spectrum. The reason that they don't do it, and while you make a comment, they have an infinite amount of capital, that's just not true, because they are so distracted with lots of other things that they're doing. AT&T is, the phone company. They're also the wireless company. They're now owning content. They run HBO. They have DirecTV. And every single one of those businesses is vying for the capital that they have. And on top of that, each one of those businesses has its own risks and demands. So the traditional fiber business, they're thinking, okay, we've got it. We've held it for a long time. These guys are going to come in and take some of our market share. I don't know that I can really do much about it. On the wireless side, to remain competitive, they've had to spend tens of billions of dollars just to buy spectrum so that they can roll out 5G. And then you think about, the fact that they bought the old Time Warner content side, spent billions of dollars, bought DirecTV, spent billions of dollars. Right. So you look at them and they're so distracted, and they have more competitors than they've ever had before, because they bought Time Warner. They're in the content business with HBO, but now they're not just competing on the fiber side or the wireless side. Now they're competing against Netflix and Amazon and Hulu. I mean, so you think about all the people that are coming at them from all angles. I don't envy that company or being in that position, because they have so many people trying to take their market share from all sides, and they only have so much money because they're public companies, and the market will hammer them if they take on too much debt, if they, go do another acquisition. And so the idea of going and spending money to upgrade fiber networks across their entire footprint, one, is too expensive for them to do. And second, they can't commit to doing that when they have other areas of their business that probably need capital more. And it's the same story for Spectrum. Spectrum is now, launching Spectrum Mobile. And so they're taking resources that they probably would have put into fiber, and now they're putting it into, growing a mobile brand. And it's to me, the best part about being in our business is having big lumbering competitors who can't move quickly. And we only focus on what we're good at: building fiber, delivering Ethernet and internet products to business customers. We don't do residential. We don't do anything else. And that allows for us to be very, very hyper-focused and use our capital in the most efficient way.
Got it. No, that makes a lot of sense. I want to, building on this idea of just local competition, introduce Snip and talk about, the founding story of Snip relative to Everstream, and just to try and understand, why start Snip Internet as a separate company? What's really the goal behind that?
Well, so if I go back to 2018, when we were planning on selling Everstream, kind of leading up to that, the fear was that we would get bought by a strategic and not a financial partner. So there's a company called Crown Castle that in kind of 27 and 18 was buying everything. Like any telecom company that came up, they were being bought. And so my thought from kind of 2015 to 2017 was, we're going to get bought by a strategic and I'm going to be out of work. And so I'm going to create Snip. So I have something to do next. And my thought was, the same way that we had been successful at Everstream competing against AT&T and Spectrum could and should be the same in the residential markets. It's complex. They're adding all kinds of fees. It makes it difficult to know what I'm going to pay this year versus next year. And then if I move, there's cancellation fees and all. It seemed like a very complicated business to deliver a very simple proposition, which was all people want is internet. They really didn't care about getting video services anymore. Everything was moving to over the top. And so the thought was, could we leverage, frankly, the Everstream network where we had already invested a bunch of money, create a separate company that was focused on the residential side, leverage the Everstream network by being a customer, a wholesale customer, and invest our money into building up and down the risers of apartment buildings so that we could provide high-speed connectivity and be super simple, meaning the way that we interact with customers, the way that we do our billing, that we only offer 2 products, fast and faster, try to keep it as simple as possible. And so that's what we did. But look, if this was not started with hundreds of millions of dollars. This is me and friends and family putting money together and starting Snip, on my own and wanting to be able to grow that. And so we did that, and we kind of, frankly, kind of limped along from, 2015 through actually March of last year I had continued to raise capital from kind of our initial group of investors, but last March closed on, 7.75 million, led by Peppertree, which is a local Cleveland-based private equity firm, and some other investors that I was familiar with, to take Snip from just Cleveland to add Columbus and add Milwaukee. So go into similar markets where the competitive dynamics were good. But, kind of an interesting thing happened along the way. Every time Everstream was looking at buying something, there was an opportunity for some of the services to not stay within Everstream. So when we bought Rocket Fiber up in Detroit, on the Everstream side, I won all the business customers, but they had a bunch of residential customers as well. And that dilutes my story on the Everstream side and my valuation. And so we parsed up the company and took all of the residential customers and dumped them into Snip. And then Snip continues to buy more and more services from Everstream. So you've kind of got this, nice symbiotic relationship between the two entities, but again, very focused. In Snip, I don't do business. I only do residential. I'm only going into, buildings that are 5 stories or above that have 35 apartments or more. And we're very, very specific on how we grow the business and keep our products very, very simple. So it's a bit of a, they're very different beasts, and clearly they're different ownership groups. So the idea of putting them together didn't really make sense. And I think they're better off being separate. So now Snip is in, we've got our largest base of customers actually now is in Detroit because of the acquisition. We're in probably 80 buildings there versus, 40, 45 in Cleveland. But, we've opened up the Milwaukee market. We have an office in every single one of these cities, in downtown. We're turning up buildings and growing that business kind of more from a bootstrap to, successful capital raise to what I think will be, an exit in the not too long term, and then another capital raise to be able to continue to expand Snip across probably 10 to 12 cities.
Got it. So I want to get your thoughts and perspective on Snip's, brand and personality, which again, just from a consumer on the outside, it's really colorful and lively and vibrant in a way that I don't think anyone would expect typically from an internet provider.
Yeah. It's why every telecommunications company that's a big telecommunications company on the business side, their logo is blue. And so that's why Everstream is purple, so that it doesn't look like everyone else. On the residential side, it was more of, they do so much consumer marketing on the residential side. There is no way that I can compete with all of the ads and stuff that they're doing. And so we have to be a little bit more aggressive and stand out. So the Snip logo came from my grandfather, my papa, was in the service business, working for Ford for most of my life, and had Snap-on tools. And if you're familiar with Snap-on tools, it's that red and black oval logo with the same kind of script that's in the Snip logo. And I just remember seeing it, and it just always caught my eye.
Yeah.
And then having, an ounce of marketing time spent, remembered at some point that somebody said yellow and black are the most recognizable and easiest to see colors together. I was like, okay, so the logo is going to be yellow and black, and it's going to look like Snap-on because I like it. And so I drew up the Snip logo, and that was the name. And it was also Snip as in cut the cord. So a little bit of a play on what was getting ready to happen in that space. And then just thought, if we're going to be out there, then we have to have taglines that, maybe are a little edgy, sometimes too edgy for people. I mean, when the first three, let's see, was, fast as fuck, happy pipe, fat pipe, happy life. And we suck less, because no one likes the cable company.
No one likes the cable company.
Yeah. And so the thought was, gosh, and the we suck less actually came from much earlier in my career. A CEO that I worked for, we were starting a new phone company, and we were basically trying to help people understand that we were trying to build a phone company from scratch against a competitor that had been at it for 100 years. And the thing that he said was, look, every day we're going to suck a little less. Because we'll get a little bit better, we'll get a little bit smarter, we'll have more time behind us, and every day we'll get a little bit better. And so that transformed into we suck less in my mind, and it's been something that I've always used. So from a Snip perspective, it was, okay, I need to be aggressive, I need to get out there and have something that's kind of a little bit in your face and edgy, but I also need the experience for customers to feel different. It needs to be really simple. It needs to be something that, they just, they go on the line or on their phone and they hit an app and I want to sign up for service, put your credit card information. We charge you every month. Hopefully you never have to talk to us, frankly, because it should just work. And so going through that process was great for me, again, because every time you've been in the business, you learn something new and you try to take the things that have worked well. I think what we have done pretty well at Snip is, again, have very clean, easy marketing with simple products, and has a personality, which allows for us to, to compete against big guys.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the most painful consumer experiences is just calling up your traditional ISP and trying to get some issue fixed. And so you talked about, mantras are magic with Everstream and the accountability idea of doing what you say you're going to do. And just that ultimately happy customers come from happy employees and the team that you've built. I'm curious how much of the culture at Snip, borrows an ethos from the culture at Everstream, or what you've done differently, or things that apply at Everstream that may not make sense at Snip, and just how you've navigated, building the culture at these two companies that are unique and have their own brands and personalities, but are different.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a little bit different. Obviously, I've got a full-time job with Everstream. I have a team of people at Snip. So I'm not at Snip as often. So I've got a team of people that a number of them have worked for me before. And so, Greg Knight, who runs technology for us at Snip, we've worked together 3 different times, and I've known him for more than 10 years. And so having somebody that and trust to be able to jump over and kind of head up that part of the business is a great thing. My CFO is a woman that worked with me in the past as well. And then Robin, who's the GM for Snip, is someone that I knew from afar. I met through my wife. We hit it off. I was looking for somebody. She was looking for something new. And so just, you find a team. And what I hope and believe anyway is that they know how I am. They know what I want. They understand what I expect from the standpoint of what the culture is going to feel like. And I'm really counting on them to help kind of continue to drive that culture over there. And, what the interesting thing about culture is it's very easy to talk about, and it's very hard to actually make work on a daily basis. And it takes a lot of time and energy, and you have to be very focused on it. What is really hard, though, is when you're doing acquisitions, because most people, when they get acquired, aren't happy about it. Let's be clear. They're fearful. They're thinking somebody's going to lose their job. They already have somebody doing what I'm doing. The name's going to change. The feeling's going to change. Our culture is going to change from the way it used to be. And so we know from the Everstream side, because we do a survey every year to be on the best place to work thing. We're on it, and that's great, and that helps with recruiting. The best thing that comes out of that process is we get survey results that show how people feel about the business.
Mm.
And we know from doing acquisitions over the last 5 years that it takes 6 to 12 months for a person that has been acquired to start to trust you. I don't care if you do everything right, you keep every promise you've ever made, it still takes 6 to 12 months for them to understand that you are going to do what you say you're going to do. You are going to help them, build their career and grow and do all the things and give them the opportunities that we talked about. But it never fails. In every acquisition that we've done, it takes 6 to 12 months. Once people reach that 12-month mark and they see how transparent we are and how we're real about our culture and that we care about it, we promote 20% of our team members every year. Those things make them go, okay, these guys aren't full of shit. They're actually going to do what they said. And so they start to buy in. And so we can watch from, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, and plus how much more committed they get to the outcomes of the business and maintaining the culture because now they feel like they're part of it. And so that's the hard part. And, at Snip, we did an acquisition in Detroit. We added 15 or so people. The company now is approaching 25. And so, that's one culture, and then as you move to like 50 and 100, the challenge at Everstream is we've gone from 22 when I joined, I guess about 45 when we switched the name to Everstream. We had 120 when we did the deal with AMP, and now we've got over 350. Trying to maintain that same culture across 350 people across 10 states so that, every office that you walk into of ours, the furniture is exactly the same. The paint is exactly the same. All of the sayings are on the wall. We do the same events in every single office. But that takes a lot of time and energy and resources so that it feels the same when you walk into St. Louis or Chicago or Milwaukee or Indy as it does when you come to Cleveland. And people don't end up feeling like, oh, Cleveland's the cool kids and everybody else, is just kind of lagging behind. That's not the case. But again, it takes a ton of work to do that.
Right. I get the sense that asking the question, how much fiber is enough? The answer is it's not in the foreseeable future that any amount is enough. But when you think about Everstream and Snip, early on, you mentioned the impact that you want to have. What is that impact?
So they're very different. So on the Everstream side, serving business customers, you do reach an opportunity where, you have built hundreds of miles or thousands of miles in a specific geography. So, in Cleveland, we have built most of the fiber that we're going to build, kind of what I'll call on our core backbone. Like, how do we connect between Toledo to Youngstown and every city in between? That's there. So our costs start to go down every single time we add a customer. And, instead of having initially, maybe it's a 24 to 36 month payback, our average paybacks in Cleveland are probably more like 12 months now. And so when we're adding fiber in, it's more like building, this last little blip off of the network into that customer's location. It's a short build. It's not that expensive. And we will continue to do those as we grow our market share here. It's a little bit different in Indianapolis, for example, where we've built 300 miles, but we're expecting to build 700 miles. So we've still got, significant capital that has to go into that market and build. So we're going to do it for a couple of reasons. One, because it's necessary. If we're going to service the customers well and grow the business in each of those markets, you have to invest like that. But it's also from a defensive perspective. If I've invested $1 billion across 10 states, it makes it really hard for somebody else to come along and invest $1 billion on top of me, because I'm already taking market share. I've already got the network built. I've got a lot of advantages over them to be able to continue to grow the business. And so the capital demands on the business will go down over time because that footprint will be kind of so ubiquitous. The way that we talk about it internally is AT&T is going to be in first place, Spectrum is going to be in second place, and we're going to be in third. And the only reason we're going to be in third is because we haven't been at it that long. And so what I think about is how much market share can we take over the next decade to service customers well and grow our business. And I know if you look at all of the customers that are within 1 mile of our fiber assets, that is a $7 billion annual spend. I got a lot of room to grow on the Everstream side before I'm bouncing up against something like that. So that's how we do it there. On the Snip side, it's a bit different. So, if you read a lot about what's happening right now, that, there's this big fiber to the home craze, and, they're talking about $7 billion on this latest FCC fund that's going to help bring internet to people in underserved areas. And there will be tens and tens of billions of dollars that are coming into fiber to the home. That's different from Snip. The fiber to the home business is a tough business. You're building fiber up and down every single street. You're in people's yards. You're, attaching to their houses. You're doing all that stuff. On the Snip side, my belief has been that by having a simple model where I'm going into apartment buildings, I'm going vertical. I can service a lot of customers in a small area. We can deliver more of a carrier grade service than a traditional internet offering. And I think that plays really well across urban environments with a large, call it 24 to 40-year-old population, a lot of millennials that are working from home. And if we have that sweet spot, then I can do very well in non-tier one markets. I don't want to be in Chicago or New York City or LA or Atlanta where you've got competition everywhere. But in tier two cities, which are, in my opinion, some of the best cities in the US, Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Milwaukee, on and on, Indy, St. Louis, those markets are ripe for somebody to come in and just outshine the traditional incumbents in those markets. And so that's what we're really after.
Got it. Building on that tier two city idea, one of the challenges specifically here in Cleveland, also in Detroit, is this issue of the digital divide and kind of the lack of internet connectivity in a lot of places. I believe Cleveland was up there as the least connected in the country. And, it's coming off the back of the UN classifying internet as a human right and public utility in the way that, we think about electricity. And so I feel like you're in a unique position to provide some insight onto this issue and how you see it evolving and things we can do about it going forward.
Yeah, so I'm gonna talk out of both sides of my mouth to answer this question. I'll be clear from the beginning. So back in 2010 when I joined OneCommunity, on top of the broadband stimulus money, we also received a grant which was run by a different group to go help address the digital divide. So again, this is 11 years ago. We were talking about this without the same quite level of urgency that we have today, but it's been going on for a long, long time. And the idea was we need to be able to educate people to understand that if I'm a student, I have to have internet access or I don't get to participate. And again, this is 11 years ago, even more prevalent now because of COVID. If I'm elderly, I have to be able to understand how to use my electronic medical record, because if I can't, I'm almost lost with talking to doctors anymore. And then last, if I'm looking for a job and I don't have internet, none of the jobs are in the newspaper anymore. They're only online, or at least at that time it was 75%. I'm sure it's even higher now. Right. So if you don't have internet, you are a have not. You are not going to be able to achieve at the same level that somebody else has it. So we started talking back then about internet being the fourth utility, that everyone had to have access to it. And I have been a proponent for a long time in the fact that the only way you are going to get people to have internet in their home, especially in the poorest of poorest neighborhoods, is if it is somehow subsidized. And so what you're talking about now is, if you're going to give people internet the same way they get subsidies for their gas bill or their electric bill or whatever, or Section 8 housing, great. But internet has to be a part of that. And so I think there's a bit of a misconception. There is internet in a lot of places. People don't buy it because they don't have the money to buy it, because that service is $45 or $50, and spending that on internet versus spending it on food, that's not going to happen. And so, there's been things that have come out even recently where AT&T and Comcast and Spectrum have lowered prices down to $20 or different things. And then Biden's come out and said, hey, we're gonna give those that need it $50. So $50. I mean, you get a lot of people to build fiber into buildings if you tell them you're going to give them $50 a month to provide that service. So I think we'll see what happens there. But it's also not just fiber. I mean, there are so many different solutions to provide internet, where you can do wireless in buildings, you can do wireless in campus environments. There's all kinds of neighborhoods around Cleveland that need that done. I think the challenge that we're finally, I guess, people maybe are finally listening, or they're finally understanding that it is one of those things that will keep people from being able to pull themselves out of poverty if they don't have access to the internet. And I think in some people's mind, that sounds too dramatic, but I think it's 100% true. If you can't do well in school and you can't understand what the doctor's telling you and you can't find a job, that's a problem. So, I know there's a lot of people that are trying to solve the issue. And I think one of the challenges is because it hasn't really been pushed at a federal level in a meaningful way, even in the city of Cleveland, there's probably 10 different groups right now that are trying to solve the digital divide. And there's meetings and meetings and meetings. And some people are doing a little bit and some people are talking a lot about it. But at the end of the day, I think, there has to be a federal initiative, a federal program that helps cover the cost of internet for people who can't afford it. You just have to have it. And then there has to be, some additional encouragement to invest in those specific buildings. And there's a ton of money. I mean, I think it was just released yesterday or the day before The FCC just came out with the new $7 billion plan through USAC, which is how you administer money through the E-rate process, where schools, libraries can now not just buy connectivity, but can buy, laptops, iPads, access points for their school and libraries, doing anything they can to try to create pockets of connectivity in every city. $7 billion goes a long way. I mean, if it's spent effectively. And, that's one of the challenges. We did our broadband grant back in 2010, and I think we stewarded the money very well. But there are plenty of places where they took money and the outcomes were crap. They took money that was there to build, but there was no money to operate the business afterwards. And if you didn't hit your goals and drive your revenue and margins up, then you were going to die. And so a number of those projects died along the way.
But before we wrap up here, I just want to get your perspective on two kind of other ideas, one of which we talked about before, which is 5G and just why does it matter and how does fiber play into that? And the other being just your perspective on Starlink and low orbit, broadband internet initiatives that are kind of gaining some, at least public interest at the moment. So just your perspective on those, and then we can wrap up with our closing questions.
Sure. So 5G does not work without fiber. So 5G, there's two parts. You have to upgrade the macro tower, which are the big cell towers that you see along the freeway. And then you have to have small cells, which are literally like every street corner, little telephone pole sized devices that have antennas in them that every single carrier is going to have. And all of them require fiber. So the amount of fiber needed for small cells is super significant. The largest tower operator in the US, Crown Castle, went and spent tens of billions of dollars buying fiber companies like Everstream to prepare them for the rollout of small cells required to make 5G a reality. You won't get the speeds and be able to do all the things, the promises of 5G, if you don't have small cell deployments, and everyone requires fiber. So fiber plays a massive role in 5G. On the Starlink side, I'm a huge Elon Musk fan. When you just think about you do PayPal, you do Tesla, you figure out some solar stuff in a way that nobody else does. Oh, and by the way, you're going to build a rocket company and a satellite company and do it better than everybody else in faster timeframes. So my public disclosure, I'm an investor in SpaceX, and SpaceX is a customer of Everstream's. So I believe that they will do well over time. It is not going to work as flawlessly as people want it to in urban areas, and that's not really what it's designed for. It's designed for rural areas to bring broadband to places where you can't get it. But I can tell you, it works. I think they will absolutely be successful. I would not bet any amount of money against Musk. I mean, for me specifically, I think he's probably one of the smartest people of my generation, and I would put him, frankly, above a Bill Gates and a Steve Jobs in the ability to think differently and do so many things extraordinarily well that I think Starlink is going to be a huge success. It's going to take some time, but I think they have their place in the industry. And look, there are so many people across the globe that still do not have internet the way that they need to. I just think he's got, the size of that opportunity for them is massive.
Yeah, it's very exciting to follow along what they're doing there.
Agreed.
So I want to tie it back here to Cleveland. One of the things that we ask everyone coming on to our dozens of listeners is not necessarily for your favorite thing in Cleveland, but for something hidden that other people may not know about. So with that, I will ask you your favorite hidden gems. It's
funny. To me, the biggest hidden gem is the biggest thing in Cleveland, but people don't seem to take advantage of it, which is the lake. I am on the lake all the time. We live in Bracknell. We are out on the lake. If it's above 70 to 75 degrees, we're going to be on the lake. And, I used to live over off Lake Avenue in the kind of Edgewater neighborhood area. And I would take my daughter to the beach every weekend. And so to me, the Flats resurgence is unbelievable. I mean, I was here when the Flats was a tomb and you were probably going to get shot or knifed or something if you were going down there. And now it's amazing. And so, I just don't think people take advantage of it. And the second thing is, and it's shocking to me, the number of people I know that don't take advantage of the Cleveland Metro Parks. When I look at the fact that you have thousands and thousands of acres of land that are being managed, as far as I'm concerned, the best managed nonprofit in Northeast Ohio. They manage the zoo, they manage all these parks, they've done amazing things at Edgewater. And so when I think about the thing, one, we need to leverage the water better. And if you're not on the water, I don't understand. I mean, I've got a son who lives in Medina who has friends from Akron who have never been on Lake Erie. That is mind-boggling to me. As a kid who grew up in California, you would drive hours to get to the beach and go to the water.
Right.
So to me, it's just interesting that it's not as big of an attraction, I guess, as I would assume it would be for, millions of people.
Yeah, totally on the same page there. It's pretty extraordinary. Very excited for it this summer.
Absolutely.
If people have anything that they would like to follow up with you about, where's the best place for them to reach you, Brett?
Shoot me an email. Just Lindsey, BLINDSEY at everstream.net.
Awesome. And my final question is something that you mentioned related to mantras or magic, but you didn't bring up, which is love you bye.
Oh, sure. So
figure it's a good place to wrap up.
Yeah, no, it's great. So I don't know why it possessed me, but I'd be sitting in my office with my door open and people would be walking by as they were leaving. And I just started shouting "Love you, bye" to people. And some people love it and some people hate it and they get super uncomfortable with it because they think I'm going to chase them down and hug them or something. But so started saying it and then everybody else kind of started saying it. And so we then we have lots of saying that, our 3 mantras are literally up on the wall in 2-foot tall letters, 20 feet long in every office. But I thought, our team needs to understand that when they're leaving, that idea of love you bye is real. We have a team of people who we count on, and I want them to understand that that's how we feel. So every door that you can leave an office from says love you bye on it. So that people think about it when they're leaving. And, and I'm sure people have tuned it out by now, but every once in a while, I'm walking out and I'm normally busy around the phone or whatever, and I'll look down and see it. And it'll make me laugh just thinking about the fact that we have it printed on a door and in every office across our footprint. So I guess just one more thing to try to, make sure people understand how much we care about it.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And with that, love you and bye.
Okay. Thanks, man. Take care.
Take care. That's all for this week. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, so shoot us an email at layoftheland@upside.fm or find us on Twitter at podlayoftheland, at TheTagan, or at Sternhefe, JEFE. We'll be back here next week at the same time to map more of the land. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please email us or find us on Twitter and let us know. And if you love our show, please leave a review on iTunes. That goes a long way in helping us spread the word and continue to help bring high-quality guests to the show. Tegan Horden and Jeffrey Stern developed the Lay of the Land podcast in collaboration with the Up Company LLC. At the time of this recording, we do not own equity or other financial interests in the companies which appear on this show unless otherwise indicated. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Founders Get Funds and its affiliates, or Actual and its affiliates, or any entity which employs us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. We have not considered your specific financial situation, nor provided any investment advice on this show. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.